fresh out the oven, it's Cinema Bums. I'm Wade.
And I'm just your friendly neighborhood Emmett.
Cinema Bums is a podcast where we watch through every single movie in popular film franchises, one each week, to try and track how the storytelling changes over time. Today, we are continuing our mini-series, Webhead Summer, covering every Spider-Man film. We will fully spoil today's film, Spider-Man 2002, but we will not spoil any future entries in the series. Emmett, how are you doing?
I'm doing quite well. I love this weird, gross movie. Let's talk about it. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. This is a deeply strange movie.
I was delighted by how strange this movie was. After having not seen it in probably 10 years at the least, I was delighted with how weird it was.
I had only ever seen this movie once as a kid. I remembered how Green Goblin dies, because it scared me. Mm-hmm. And I remember the scene where Peter catches everything in the lunch tray, because I thought it was cool. Those were the only memories that I retained from probably being like 8 years old and seeing this on DVD. Had you seen this more recently?
More recently than that, but not a lot. Maybe when I was like 11 or 12. Like you, the only part that I remembered from all of this, I remember the part where he lets the guy die, where he lets the guy go, and then he lets the guy die.
Mm-hmm.
Only other thing I'd remembered from it was when the Green Goblin died, like you. Everything else was like a whole new experience to me. I was like, this is wild. I can't believe any of this is in there. The part about the wrestling. Also, we need to talk about Spider-Man's homophobia. Like, let's not let that
yes.
stand. Our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Come on.
Not so friendly
to everybody. Come on. What the hell?
Spider-Man's problematic past. I've also got to say, you mentioned when he lets the robber pass him. I've got to take a little bit of issue with this, because people are saying that it's his fault that he lets the guy get away. Peter Parker, at least to the knowledge of everyone else, is just like a normal teenager in a hallway. A robber is running at him holding a gun at full speed. It is not Peter's responsibility to, tackle this guy who's brandishing a weapon at him?
Yeah, no.
There is no way that the police would be yelling, "Stop him! Stop him!"
Also, it's always been unclear to me in this movie, and I think this movie, Sam Raimi does the best with what he's got with this, but we can get into that.
Mm-hmm.
Uncle Ben and how he needed to get shot in all of that, because we don't actually see it happen.
Yeah.
I mean, what did Uncle Ben do? Try and stand in the way, try and be the man, be the hero, and do it, and then that's why he got shot? Or did this guy just walk out of there after having robbed the place without shooting anyone and decide to plug some old dude in the street? It does not make sense. Something about that doesn't add up to me.
Yeah.
Quite properly, and never has.
And he's just dying out there in the street. I have seen other versions of this where I'm more by whatever sin it is that Peter commits to let the guy get away with it.
Sure.
In this situation, I don't hold it against Peter at all. If a man was running towards me with a gun, I would not do anything to try and stop him in any situation.
Yeah, just duck and cover. Get the hell out of Dodge, man.
Okay, today we are talking about the big one, the big bad boy, the start of a new generation.
Talking about Tobey M.F. Maguire.
Oh, God. This dude.
This dweeb. Why has he cursed our existence?
Look, let's get into it. I think he's so bad in this movie. And I don't think it's entirely his fault, but I really think, my main criticism of this movie is that I don't like him. I don't understand what he cares about and what his relationships are and why I should root for him as a character.
You know that thing that we always talk about with Mark Hamill? Tobey Maguire does not have it. That thing where what he's looking at, you believe it's there? No, not happening with old Tobe. I'm just what?
I mean, like, what is the guy's deal? I have no idea.
He's so creepy and weird.
Why
and
was a generation entranced by him?
he is like not emo enough for it to be a thing. He is not hot enough for it to be cute. He is not nerdy enough for it to be okay. It is just bad all around. And that is, I blame a lot of that on the writing, but a lot of it is his strange ass delivery.
Yeah, he is so creepy. I mean, from the very beginning when he's like, oh, let me take some pictures of you. Like, so creepy. And then when he's not being Peter, when he's being Spider-Man, like the lines are pretty good Spider-Man quips, but they sound so fake coming out of his mouth. Like he could not sound less convincing giving like a throwaway burn to a bad guy if he tried.
So I watched this on a cute FaceTime date with Arabella and watched this movie while she also watched it. And she was like, why is this movie so gross? First off. But then, yeah, it's like, why is he such a, I don't know. He's a weird dude.
It's bad. It's bad casting. It's a bad performance. His performance is badly directed with how the rest of the world was directed, and really principally like poorly written dialogue.
Yeah.
I think all of those are converging to leave sort of this gaping hole in the center of an otherwise sometimes absolutely astounding, incredible movie.
It really is. And everyone else in this movie is putting in top dollar work. Like every other performance in this is some of the best you see out of them, at least in that era of those actors. It's like so good.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, the directing is spot on and like gets it. And the visuals in this, despite sometimes being hindered by old like 2002 style CGI, but like the visual effects and the practical visuals in this are incredible. And like the way the camera is used in this, amazing. I mean, a lot to love from Sam Raimi's work on this, for sure.
Yeah, and I agree that like so many supporting characters in this are giving like these unbelievably good performances. But I also think like the movie is doing so much that you kind of forget about all the other threads when they're off screen. Like Dafoe or Kirsten Dunst or like someone will pop up and then be gone for like 25 minutes and then pop back up. And you're like, oh, right, that's going on too.
Yeah.
Well, to give a little bit of the stats here, I would say go back and listen to our X-Men episode if you want a full history of the superhero movie. But basically, Batman and Robin sort of killed what they were up until that point, something primarily for kids, something very involved with selling toys. And then you've got Blade, which comes back as like a totally just for adults horror thing. And really in 2000, you've got X-Men, which is being like, okay, here's a movie with attitude for teenagers, and little kids will probably kind of like it too, and adults will probably kind of like it too. But like, here's a movie where we've taken the comic book and tried to take it seriously and dress everyone in sexy black leather. And it is very much out of the big success of that this movie is coming out. Spider-Man released May 3rd, 2002 by Columbia Pictures. There was a big rights battle. This movie was basically like the original X-Men in development hell forever, but ended up the rights reverting to Columbia Pictures, who produced the 1977 movie we talked about last week as well. This was directed by Sam Raimi, a really incredible genre director. Got his start in sort of the Michigan DIY scene. Him and the Coen brothers came up together.
No way.
Collaborated on a lot of stuff early on.
That's so cool.
I read that in the early days, he lived in a house with the Coen brothers, Frances McDormand, and Holly Hunter. We're all living in a house and trying to make money.
That's incredible.
So he's this like very visually expressive director. He starts making horror movies, the Evil Dead series, all throughout the 80s. He also makes Dark Man, so he had done a superhero movie before this. But more directly before this in the 90s, he was sort of on a string of like more serious movies. I don't know if that's just the way things were leaning or if he felt like he had something to prove. But like before this, he did The Quick and the Dead, A Simple Plan, For the Love of the Game, The Gift. Like not stuff that is very much has like the horror sensibilities or the really crazy camera movements he's known for. This series is really him taking all of that stuff and coalescing it in a big budget movie again. And this did have a big budget, 140 million, but it ended up making 821 million. Gigantic success. Third highest grossing film of 2002.
Didn't it break the opening weekend record?
Yes, it was the first movie to ever make $100 million in one weekend.
That's so cool.
So how do you feel about Sam Raimi? I mean, have you seen much of his stuff?
Well, my main exposure, I think, is exclusively through the 3 Evil Dead original movies, which is Evil Dead 2, and Army of Darkness, which I cannot recommend highly enough. I played a drinking game with good friend of mine and friend of the pod, Beth Fletcher, last Halloween, where we watched through all 3 of those movies. And when I say by the end of that, we were crawling, you can't walk straight after having seen those movies anyway, but certainly not if you're playing the drinking game version of it. I highly recommend as a Halloween trick or treat. You know, Evil Dead, the original, was shot for, again, $0 in that little shack. And it's crazy that you say that about the Coen brothers, because the Coen brothers use that shack in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? It's the shack that they explode with the water. And I believe that was a practical effect, that they really destroyed that shed that he used for the first 2 Evil Dead movies. He is like coming from the most creative kind of directing, which is horror on a 0 budget, making gruesome and wackadoodle special effects and like making it fun and zany and scary all at the same time. Consistently through those 3 movies, I would imagine that Darkman has a similar sensibility from its content to really take that. I mean, you look at somebody like that, I think of another person to have come up through weird, gross out, crazy 0 budget horror to make one of the greatest drama epics of all time. We're talking about Peter Jackson. That is the kind of
okay.
That's what it's a similar vibe right there. And I think you can track that with Taika too in a similar way. I mean, horror being not so much his bag, but that kind of really low budget stuff, and then give him a huge project and he's going to deliver because he has like been so creative with that. He's not doing mumblecore with 0 budget. He's doing wildly inventive camera movements and characters and with all of that. So I think it all comes through in this movie with like those weird flashes of the spider and the skull and stuff like that. And like all of the flashback stuff and the way that this movie is so deeply weird, like has Spider-Man's origin be through wrestling. It just like brings in everything. And it's even Bruce Campbell, who plays Ash in all the Evil Dead movies, playing the professional wrestling announcer guy. So, you know, it all ties back around. What do you think of Sam Raimi as a director after having looked at this?
Well, I guess I knew him primarily through these films, first of all. In preparation for this, I went and watched Evil Dead 2, which I've got to say is just like astounding, like one of the best movies I've ever seen. This is obviously like my reductive modern take, because all these things have been later inspired by it. But Evil Dead 2 to me was kind of like if Pixar made a horror movie. Like it's just like an endlessly creative, goofy, wacky, weird, won't stop coming like monster movie. And so I definitely like then getting to watch this, it was so cool to see him like bring those sensibilities to like a big blockbuster. I think in a bunch of sequences in this movie you can like really tell they got a horror director, and that plays off so well. I mean, I don't think I can say enough about like the directing in this movie. The stuff that Sam Raimi does of looking at a scene and then just being like, okay, what is like the craziest way we can stage this. And in a way that like feels visceral and exciting and propulsive, not so much in a Michael Bay sort of way where it's like just sort of like dizzying, or you feel like he's just like showing off, or even sort of J.J. Abrams is kind of close to that too, where like things constantly need to be moving. This is more like making the camera a character and like having that character interact in surprising ways constantly.
And something that I think about to that point, you know how the whole time we were doing the X-Men series, it was in search of the relatable superhero movie. The superhero movie whose stakes you could feel. And I think this is that movie. I think this is the movie that I was talking about that whole time. That like feels so relatable. And even at the end, the choice that he's given is not between the city and the woman he loves. It's between a car full of children and the woman he loves. So even then, it's like stakes that one can understand. You can understand 10 or 20 people dying in a car accident. You can understand one person dying. Those are stakes that we can like feel, and he's completely there. And it's like in the last scene with Willem Dafoe, he's like, he spells it out. It's a little heavy-handed in the script, but he says, "I'm like a father to you, Peter." All of it is very real, and like the emotional stakes of it feel 100% close to the bone all the time throughout the whole movie.
I just like assumed watching this movie that it was going to end with Green Goblin on top of the Empire State Building with the remote to a machine that turns everyone crazy, and Peter has to go up and stop it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. It's like much more intimate. The final fight between Peter and Green Goblin, that's like in some sort of like graveyard, spooky forest setting, has got to be one of the best fights I've seen in any superhero movie.
So good.
Like, it is just so tight and bloody and distressing. And I went back and like rewatched it this morning after having watched the movie last night to get a feel for it again. Like, it feels so real and so close. And like, that is really to this movie's credit, that even though you see the template for so many other superhero movies here, like it is still wisely making personal choices in a way that a lot of others aren't going to.
Despite Tobey Maguire in many ways, every relationship in this movie to Peter feels grounded. And I think that's a testament to the side characters.
Well, it's like a Chekhov play. Like every relationship is tied back to him in such an ingrained way. The bad guy's his best friend's dad. His best friend is dating the girl he loves. The girl he loves is his next door neighbor. Yeah. Like, it is all so smartly weaved together, even though it is in some ways really fundamentally changing what is actually the standard Spider-Man origin story. It is doing so in a way that establishes this movie universe very seamlessly.
Like a web, almost. Like a web of connections with him at the center, almost.
The other big creative force here is one we've talked about recently, many times on this podcast, David Koepp, writer of Jurassic Park and The Lost World: Jurassic Park. Also wrote the original Mission Impossible, wrote this screenplay.
Also wrote Kimmy, which we discussed at length on some other episode.
Yeah.
I feel like this is one of the least good scripts of his that we have talked about.
Yeah, I feel pretty comfortable digging into this script a little bit because of how much we've been on the record of liking Koepp's work. This, to me, is kind of the opposite of his Lost World script, where in that he has all these great one-liners and these cool ideas for scenes, but like the structure and the story of that movie totally falls apart. Yeah. And that I don't hold against him so much because he had all these sort of mandates and stuff. But this movie is kind of the opposite to me, where he's got a great structure.
Yes.
And he's got great characters and everything weaved together. But like the minute-to-minute dialogue in this thing is not good. I mean, oftentimes, especially in the romantic scenes, especially a lot of the stuff Peter has, feels like a parody of a coming-of-age movie. You know?
Yeah. What to do with that?
Oh, and we should say music by Danny Elfman. Also did the score for the Batman 89. If you haven't heard that score, but you've heard the Spider-Man score, then you've heard that score.
Well, I was going to say, he also did the music for Nightmare Before Christmas.
Emmett,
Yeah.
take it on the whole.
Mm-hmm.
Spider-Man 2002. Are you giving it a flop or a bop?
Bop, for sure. For sure. It's too much fun not to. I think it is a crisply paced origin story where they still manage to give the origin story like half of the movie's length, and then the first adventure the other half of the movie's length, but they do it in a way where you don't really notice that it's happening that way. Like, it doesn't feel like two parts of the movie because they've built in the Osborn stuff so early on. So I think it's really cleverly structured in that way, so that none of that feels like, you know how sometimes you'll have a second half of a movie come along, you're like, whoa, we're in a whole different world, or at least a whole different conflict and story. This feels like still on the same trajectory the whole time, which I think is well to its credit, while being encased in two halves, which I would call the origin story and the first adventure. It's good. And I love Willem Dafoe in this. I love Willem Dafoe and I love James Franco in this. And I think their performances are what make me like really like this movie. Take it from just like a pretty good, well-directed superhero movie to like a truly rewatchable thing that I would be interested in.
Yeah, Franco and Dafoe are such good casting as father and son because they have this like similar deranged look, and they're just like so striking visually. I mean, I think like look at like a still frame of any scene they're in together in this movie, and like you get what the movie is going for. So much more than you do maybe even like watching the scene. Like even the last image of them like hugging is so powerful. Like, good casting and really elevating this thing, I feel like.
Yeah. Wait, flop or bop?
I don't know. I feel really conflicted about this. Like, more conflicted than maybe any movie we've done. So, I don't know, because some stuff I think like is incredible. A lot of the directing, a lot of the side performances, and then some stuff I think like just fundamentally doesn't work. Like, I don't think the Peter Parker of this movie works, and that sort of like makes things hard. And I also think that I'm maybe like harder on this movie because of how great some of the other stuff is. That it's like so easy to see that this movie could be like an all-time 5-star undisputed masterpiece with, you know, some better dialogue and maybe a stronger casting, clearer direction.
What if you'd had the guy playing Iceman in X-Men playing Spider-Man in this movie instead? It's the same time. It's about the same age.
I think he would do a really good job.
Because I think he has so little in those movies, and he does so much and is so good in them. And like make some pretty cringy dialogue less cringy, whereas Tobey Maguire only increases it.
Yeah, I feel like the Spider-Man thing is that he's like a good, funny dude who is like kind of dorky, so people don't really pay attention to him. And that's like the thing that makes when he's Spider-Man work, because he has all these like quips that is like the thing the character is known for, that he is like cracking these jokes, but those have to feel like they're coming out of Peter too. And in this movie, it feels like the gulf between them is gigantic.
Yeah.
And you're just not really sure like what his deal is.
Yeah. When Harry is jealous of Spider-Man, you're like, really?
And then you get to like one of the scenes with Kirsten Dunst, who I think is amazing in this, or Willem Dafoe, and it just like so livens up the movie, and you're like, okay, more of this. Like all of the side characters are probably in this movie for like 13 minutes of total runtime because it is juggling so much.
Yeah.
I do think if they made this movie today, it would be at least 2 movies, if not 3 movies.
Yeah. I don't know. On the other hand, is it really doing less overall than the most recent Spider-Man movie is? I mean, that movie has a lot going on too.
Yeah.
Well, it's also sometimes unclear how much time has passed in this film. Like they graduate and then how long passes? How long are they in the city doing their thing? Like how long is it until he runs into MJ again? Like all of that is kind of like, yeah, and later.
Mm-hmm.
It was later.
It doesn't help that Tobey Maguire is 26 and looks like he's 32 as he plays from an 18-year-old to a question mark year old
Right.
in this movie. But yeah, it feels sort of like it spans this great gulf of time. And in like the last 20 minutes, Aunt May has a line where she says, "You're doing so much, Peter. You're freelancing at the Bugle. You're doing this other stuff, and you're going to college." And I was like, he's going to college?
Yeah.
Because we have not seen or heard anything about that.
Nothing about the college thing.
And that's just something else?
He's just going to college in the city, and that's another thing he's doing on the daily? Damn. He is busier than hell.
I mean, speaking of the daily and side performances, also J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson.
Oh my god.
Someone else who lights up this movie for brief patches.
Yeah, he is so good, so incredibly good in this. And when he's like, "I don't trust anybody but my barber," that is an incredible joke. That's one David Kep joke that we could David keep right now. Like that's amazing. Wade, what behind the scenes drama do you have for this movie?
We do want to mention that Kep is the only one credited, but this movie was sort of based on an earlier draft from a James Cameron script, which was rewritten into Kep's main script. Scott Rosenberg does sort of the final pass, and then the guy they have who's actually on set of the film, David Kep, doesn't normally go on set and be the on-set writer for his movies.
Oh, gotcha.
So the on-set like puncher-upper was this guy named Alvin Sargent, and he's the guy who goes on to write the next two movies. So that's sort of his connection here, and I guess we'll see his work the next 2 weeks.
Just another thing that I would like to bring up about this movie is the grossness of this movie. And this is a thing which I think carries over from the horror thing, but is not directly tied in exactly to like, you know, it feeling like a horror movie. Although I do think at times that it does, and you feel the horror director. But it is more that like body horror of turning into a spider person. Like when the little hairs come out of his thumb, that is, ugh. I did remember that part from having originally watched it. And let me tell you, I did not like seeing it again. It was just as awful as I'd ever remembered it being. Like the gross quality of like the webs that he's shooting out of himself.
The decision to make it organic webs instead of ones that he builds is so weird and so like straight up disgusting. Truly.
And that whole scene where he's like, is this funny? With another actor, it would be funny. Tobey Maguire, it's just kind of sad.
I thought some of that scene was kind of funny. I think the stuff towards the beginning is where Tobey is strongest, and as the movie keeps going, it sort of loses the thread on him a little bit. I mean, can you explain to me like the final moments of the movie, like why exactly he makes this decision with MJ to like reject her and say, all I have to offer is a friend?
Not at all. Not even a little bit. It's completely out of the blue and seems totally unconnected. It's like a Batman ending to a John Hughes movie. And I'm like, where did this come from? Why? It reminded me so much of the end of the most recent Batman movie. No spoilers. Like, it reminded me a lot of that, in a graveyard, saying goodbye, you know, like leaving, parting ways. But there is no point in this movie where it's really made clear. I mean, and I think this is something that eventually he just learns to accept, but it's like, I guess the idea is that MJ was in peril because she was Spider-Man's girlfriend, but she was already close to Osborn. You know what I mean? It's like, it's certainly not Peter's fault.
But also, you said it, like, she was Spider-Man's girlfriend, not Peter Parker's. So Peter Parker to be like, no, I can't do this, they're in this weird like Clark, Superman, Lois love triangle. But she has gotten all this attention for her connection with Spider-Man, not Peter. And then when
Right.
she opens up to Peter, like, why doesn't he reciprocate? I think this movie is a little stuck on like the tragedy of Spider-Man, which definitely
Yeah.
is a thing, but in some situations feels a little overblown here, I feel like.
You don't have to keep her around if you don't want to. You can just have a happy ending on the movie, you know, and like use her later for some future tragedy. If that's what if like he has to be some tragic hero. I don't think it would have killed everybody if this movie ended with them together.
Yeah, and to the tragic hero of it all, I feel like it is a weird move to start with MJ. Because in the comics, it always is like he dates Gwen Stacy in high school, who is like
Oh.
the sweet, smart, innocent girlfriend. She gets killed by the Green Goblin, and then he dates MJ like in college, and as an adult they get married. And she is like sassy, sexy, like in charge sort of girlfriend. And there's
okay.
a lot in the relationship dynamics there that get kind of sacrificed when you start with MJ, I feel like.
Yes, for sure. Also, like, the weird thing with her dad is just, like, never resolved. The fact that her dad is at least emotionally, if not physically abusive, and
true.
just a bad person. And, like, all of that is just, like, yeah, pretty terrible.
And what the hell is going on with Harry? Like, they're dating, but they don't ever talk, and like
They never
she
speak
can't
or
let him
hang
know
out.
that she is working as a waitress because he'll think that's below. Like, it's so strange.
Yeah, that part really blew my mind. She's like, don't tell Harry. Deranged.
Speaking of deranged, that brings us on to the villain report, talking about Willem Dafoe, who we've talked about recently, much younger Willem Dafoe, 20 years ago, taking on Spider-Man's number one nemesis, the Green Goblin. How did you feel about the performance and the costume and the plan and all of his stuff here?
I think Willem Dafoe's performance is unparalleled in superhero villain history. I think he is giving one of the most nuanced and incredible performances of a villain ever, of a guy who you really want to like. And at first you're introduced to as this kind of like benefactor of both Peter and Peter's friend. And he's a rich guy, but he's an okay rich guy. He seems nice, and he takes care of his son. Like, you even see him get out of, like, they're having the argument in the Rolls Royce, but he gets out of the Rolls Royce and, like, brings the backpack to his son because he forgets it. He's just, like, introduced as a stand-up kind of guy. And the son doesn't like him, but you're like, of course the son doesn't like him. He's a rich father. Of course he's not going to like him. And I think that that's so interesting, especially after Peter losing his own father figure. Him kind of being introduced as a second surrogate father figure for Peter is really cool. As far as his plan goes, it's a little less clear. At first, one of his scientists basically is like, this product isn't ready, and everybody else thought it was, and that scientist, like, at the critical moment, tells the government contractors it's not ready, we can't use it. And so he's pissed about that. And he wants to prove to that scientist that it is ready, so he uses it on himself, and then it drives him mad, and he kills that scientist. But he doesn't seem to remember that as Osborn. It seems that he is getting a split personality sort of thing going on, where a Green Goblin persona is taking him over entirely, and then also sometimes he's William Is it William?
Norman.
Yeah, sometimes he's Norman Osborn, who is a good man who is confused and being ousted from his company. And sometimes he's the Green Goblin, who is very vindictive. But the Green Goblin knows what Norman's problems are and is solving them sort of making them worse for Norman. But Norman is unaware of the Green Goblin and his activity. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think that's how it's portrayed.
That part's a little confusing, like how much they know about each other, what's going on. Norman's being ousted from the company, so he decides to just completely incinerate everyone who is ousting him from the company I guess now Norman's still in charge of the company. I don't know what he wants Spider-Man to do. Like, he says you could join me, but what would he and Spider-Man be doing? And what is the Green Goblin's ultimate plan other than destruction? He says we could change this city or destroy it. But why? And why would he want Spider-Man on his side? Does he still seek a surrogate son? I don't know. It's very strange. It feels a little Darth Vader without having anything to back it up, you know?
Yeah, I agree with you that the plan is a little convoluted. It sort of seems like he just wants revenge on the business people, which I think is actually like a good small scale thing. But then I'm a little bit confused of like how far it balloons up from there.
Yeah.
But I do really agree with you that the performance is excellent. I mean, it's the acting, it's his incredible voice, and it also is his physicality. And he insisted on like doing his own stunts and learning the fights. And he was like the one standing on the glider. They said 95% of the time, because he was just like, a stuntman isn't going to give the physical performance I want to give. So like, please let me be the one who actually learns it and does it. And for a guy in his late 40s in this movie, I mean, that's so cool. And it pays off because, as we said, that fight, those movements, all of that stuff is so cool. And sort of the angle on the character. I think Moon Knight on Disney Plus is kind of diving into this right now too. Like, if you have multiple personalities, like, and one of them is committing crimes and the other would never do something like that, like, how culpable are you? And what does that really mean? And I think all of that stuff is really interesting.
For sure.
We just mentioned Dafoe. Maybe we'll be mentioning him again. Let's see. It's time for MVP, OTP, our most valuable player other than Peter. I'm taking old Toby off the board for this, but the rest of the cast is wide open. Emmett, who is your MVP of Spider-Man?
Okay. I just want to give quick shout outs to Rosemary Harris as Aunt May in this.
Mm-hmm.
She is excellent in like the 3 scenes that she's in. She's so good in this, but there's not a lot of writing for her in this movie.
Yep.
I just want to say I've had dinner at her house. That was cool. Just put that out there. And then I think the guy who's the professional wrestler, much love for him.
That's Macho Man Randy Savage.
If he does have a husband, I think that's wonderful. If he doesn't, I also think that's wonderful. Unlike Spider-Man, who obviously has some to say.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
Whatever. Okay, David Koepp. You can, David, keep that one to yourself. It's got to be James Franco as Harry. Like, he is constantly in this, just screwing up Peter's life in much more subtle ways than his dad is. But he is there and he is doing it. And I'm not so sure he's doing it unknowingly. You know, like, I think, he knows what's up. I can't wait to see what happens with that character in future entries in the series, perhaps.
Things are tense with them at the end. That final funeral scene, I mean...
That looks like it's out of The Godfather.
In my seats.
That's incredible. That final funeral scene. Yeah.
Tensions are really high. And apparently I was reading that, reportedly on set, the two actors never really got along either. And I think that is just like playing into all of the levels there that are going on.
I feel it. It feels tense. Who's your MVP, OTP-ta?
Oh, I mean, so many great performances in this movie, but I think that I have to give it to Kirsten Dunst, who really is great as Mary Jane. I feel like the movie comes alive anytime she's there, which is not that often. And I think that she is managing to sell the like pulpy 60s comic book romance they're kind of going for between the two of them, which Peter can't really do. And I think that this movie like also kind of gets like the innate melancholy nature of Kirsten Dunst as a performer and like keys into that and uses her strength in a way that a lot of sort of teen heartthrob parts don't normally. This is a role that you could totally see Kirsten Dunst playing today. as like an adult,
Uh-huh.
respectable
Yeah.
Oscar-nominated actor. Like it's a role that feels right for her in the way that it's played, and I think that's so cool. She is my MVP. As we've already talked about a lot of great people in this, I just want to shout out a couple of bit parts that are played by actors who are now famous. I mean, you've got Octavia Spencer as the wrestling check-in lady.
Yes.
For 1 second. You've got Elizabeth Banks as Betty Brant, who's a big comics character, but is like the receptionist at the Daily Bugle.
Oh, yeah.
There for like one scene. Even Joe Manganiello, who's like the boyfriend at the beginning. This movie is sort of like packed with people who will have bigger parts and other stuff later, which is cool.
He is so good. That her boyfriend's name is Flash. I mean, like, you're right. This does have a 1960s feel to it, even though it is clearly a movie taking place in 2002. She has a boyfriend named Flash who comes and honks to pick her up in his, like, sweet little 60s convertible. Spider-Man is thinking about getting a car. He lives in New York City and he's thinking about getting a car. He is not living in the world as we know it. This boy is a creep. He is done. Tobey Maguire and those awful peepers of his are canceled.
Oh, man.
Wait, any other final thoughts?
You're so right. And I feel like that weird style is like kind of bubbling under the surface, but I can't quite put my finger on it. Although it does clearly take place in 2002 because they had to edit the Twin Towers out of it. And there are sort of the explicit post 9/11 references of like the scene where all the New Yorkers are like, don't mess with New York. New York strong. And they're like throwing hot dogs at the Green Goblin or whatever.
That's when I was like, this is a New York movie. Yes.
And it ends with him posing in front of the American flag as the
on
final
the
shot
Empire
of the
State
movie.
Building. Yeah.
I mean, you can really tell that it is like immediate post 9/11. Okay. Look, I skirted the question. I never gave it a flop or a bop, but I am going to give it a bop because I do think it is so well directed. It has so many great sequences. It is really fun to watch. You just see really the potential there. You really see the potential there for it to be like the perfect superhero movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it totally holds up to that lens. But I do think as a fun, amazingly directed movie. I mean, I wish that any of the superhero movies we're getting now were directed with the sense of visual kinetic style that Sam Raimi brings to this. PlayStation 1 CGI aside. I think it just is like really, really fun to watch. And I'm excited to watch 2 and 3 and see how they sort of progress some of that stuff.
I had one more final thought. When I originally watched this movie with my friend and hopefully eventual friend of the pod, Andrew Tillett, we were watching it, and I think he was the one who showed it to me for the first time, and he had seen it before and liked it. He and Caroline and I were all watching it together, and, you know, he goes to the pro wrestling in, like, some hokey homemade Spider-Man costume. And you're like, yeah, that seems about right. Like, this is some kid. He wouldn't have the money or the power. And then 5 minutes later, swinging through New York City, baby, in a brand new, beautiful spandex Spidey suit. And I remember me and Caroline both being like, where'd he get it? And Andrew being like, the costume store. And us just dying. And this is a joke that I've remembered for so long. So shout out to Andrew. Truly one of the funniest.
Much love to Andrew. Now it is time for our favorite part of each and every episode. Bums the Word, our quiz game. Today, Emmett, I am going to be quizzing you on the 10 highest grossing films of the year 2002.
Oh my God.
A year we have never covered on the podcast before.
This is so exciting.
So I will say we're doing top 10. You have absolutely heard of, if not seen, all of these movies.
Uh-huh.
Spider-Man is number 3.
Okay.
And other than that, the other 4 movies in the top 5 are all sequels, all number 2s. So that's a little hint for you. 2002 was a big year for sequels.
Yeah, it makes sense. The second in the second decade and the second millennium, the second year of the second millennium.
We're starting off at the bottom of the list now. Number 10, this is a science fiction film directed by maybe the most famous living director, based on a short story by one of the most famous science fiction writers, no longer with us.
Minority Report. Probably one of the biggest flops of all time. Despite loving both the director and the writer.
That is correct. Emmett's recently poorly reviewed Minority Report.
A movie that somehow manages to be both pro-cop and pro-murder and pro-crime. All three of those things at the same time. And probably also pro-business police state, now that I come to think of it. It's wild. It's wild. It's like Steven Spielberg was pulling from the Christopher Nolan book on social commentary or something.
Film number 9. This is a romantic comedy. This is, if you will believe it, the highest grossing romantic comedy of all time, and also one of, if not the highest grossing independent movie of all time.
There's Something About Mary.
Nope. So unlike most romantic comedies, this is not sort of trading on the popularity of its leading couple. This is about sort of like a specific culture and their customs around dating and marriage.
Which culture might that be?
Well, I can't exactly tell you because then you would immediately know the movie.
Okay.
The country is in the title. It's about, someone who came from a European, Mediterranean country, immigrated to America.
My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
That is correct.
Oh my God.
That is
Incredible.
correct.
A movie which I believe I saw in theaters. I certainly never saw it any other place. And moments of it will haunt me until my dying day. Let me just say that.
Oh, man. Okay, film number 8. This is an animated adventure comedy. Definitely a film aimed at children and families. It's not a musical, but it's set in a historical time period. It's a pretty good movie. The first film in a franchise that I believe still continues to this day.
Set in a historical time period?
Yes, but the main characters are animals, not people, for the most part, with one notable exception.
Is it Winnie the Pooh?
Nope. It's sort of got an odd trio at its core, and they're all uniting to accomplish something. But you've got sort of a big no-nonsense guy, you've got the bad guy, and then you've got the bumbling, lovable, aloof idiot. And these three unlikely animals are partnering together to help protect a small child, a small human.
Oh, it's Ice Age. Jeez. Yikes.
Yes, it is Ice Age.
Wow.
Send me on my way. On my way. Send me on my way. On my way. Okay, film number 7. Film number 7 is also a movie. This is written and directed by an auteur, a sort of hit or miss horror auteur, and this is him taking that big swing at a sci-fi horror action movie.
Is it Hellboy, the original?
No, but that is a good guess. This is a guy who has a really big breakout film. I mean, a huge surprise hit breakout film. And this is him sort of following it up with a different sort of bigger, twisty blockbuster.
Oh. Is this Signs?
It is. Well done. Well done. Definitely reminded of Signs as we look at Jordan Peele's Nope. Both in sort of similar vibe, and I feel like M. Night was kind of heralded in the same way at that point, but obviously it kept going.
Now, do you remember when I used to have that job hanging pictures in people's houses? One time I went over to this lady's house to hang it must have been like 30 different pieces of art. She was like around doing a bunch of different stuff. Her husband was just sitting there on the couch watching Signs on like full volume. That was the only time I've ever seen Signs, but it took me like twice as long as it should have to hang on to this Phoenix, because I was like the whole time just over my shoulder, like, oh my God, what's Joaquin Phoenix going to do now?
Film number 6. This is, you know what? I'm not even going to tiptoe around it. This is the obligatory James Bond film on this list.
Oh God. Okay.
It is the 4th and final Pierce Brosnan film.
Is it Moonraker?
It's not Moonraker. You've got Halle Berry playing the Bond girl. You've got John Cleese playing Q.
Is it Goldeneye?
Nope.
I'm not gonna get it.
It is Die Another Day. Okay, now we're in the top 5. Sequel territory. Film number 5 is science fiction comedy, a sequel to a big hit. It's sort of like a buddy cop, odd couple sort of movie in a sci-fi world. I think the first movie in this series you famously really, really struggled to guess on a different bum's the word, despite definitely knowing this movie.
Is it The Last Star Trooper 2?
No, you've got like old action hero whose vibe is like really over it, and then you've got young hot movie star cool guy.
Oh, Men in Black 2.
Yes, Men in Black 2.
That's it. All right, good.
The 4th highest grossing film of 2002. This is a science fiction movie that is both a sequel and a prequel.
Is it Attack of the Clones?
It is Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones.
A movie that I'm not sure I've ever even watched, to be honest. Like all the way
number
through.
4 here, behind Spider-Man.
Incredible.
Okay, now we're down to the 2 highest grossing films of the year. I know they're both from series, near and dear to your heart.
Okay. One of them is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets.
That's number 2.
Number 2. Okay. Give me a tiniest description of the second one.
This is the number 1 highest grossing movie of the year. It is a sequel. It's the second movie in a trilogy, and it is adapted from a classic novel. It's a fantasy movie.
Oh, it's Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. The best movie ever put to film.
That is correct.
Tell me that the Battle of the Pelennor is better than the Battle of Helm's Deep, and you can, you know what you can do. All right? So, look for me on the 3rd day when the sun rises. I cannot stress enough. This is mostly just because I originally only had the first and second movies on DVD, and nobody wants to watch the first movie over and over and over again. So I would just only watch the second movie over and over and over again. Finally, after watching the first and second movies over and over and over again, I finally watched the third movie like 4 years later, and like, oh, thank God. They finally destroyed that ring. What a relief.
Well, there you are, the films of 2002. And well done, Emma. I think that's all but one. Very strong turnout here. Thank you for tuning in again to Cinema Bums and our Webhead Summer. In 11 weeks, a mere 11 weeks, we're going to be covering Jordan Peele's Nope as the year of Nope continues. But next week, we're doing Spider-Man 2 from 2004, the big one, the one everyone loves to talk about. We're going to be seeing how it holds up today.
We're going to talk about old Dr. Octavius. I'm excited.
Mm-hmm. Until then, any parting words for the listeners, Emmett?
Oh, yes. Check out Mended Wing Theater on Instagram, Facebook, GoFundMe, etc. That's a Mended Wing Theater. We are going to be taking Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors all across North Carolina throughout May. Depending on when this is airing, we may already be on the road. That does not mean we cannot use your contributive dollars. Always looking for that little bit of gas money that's going to get us over the finish line. Thank you very much. This is what I do with all of the money that I make from podcasting. So it's a pet venture of mine, and it's really wonderful to get to bring Shakespeare to the kids. So all of that being said, Thank you so much. Wouldst thou stay frosted on this eve?
Cinema Bums is a production of DKG Podcasts. It is created and produced by Emma Temple and me, Wade Lawrence Holloman. I also edit and mix the podcast. Our theme music is by Zane Holloman, who you can find on Bandcamp, and our show art is by Autumn Beckner. Our social media is managed by Laura Bennett. If you like what you hear, please tell all your friends and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, the 2 best ways to spread the word about our work. You can also follow us on Instagram at CinemaBums or email us at cinemabumspod@gmail.com. Don't flake on us. We'll be back next week.